whole introduction to all this, the last thing I want to do is just quickly talk about the 5 main branches of philosophy. They can be there could be more than 5, there could be less, there could be, and all these 5 branches have many other different branches within them, but this is what classically in philosophy, how we would describe them. And so we're going to stick with the classical understanding, okay? So, the 5 branches of philosophy. All right? The first one is kind of one we've been talking about the whole time, and that is metaphysics. All right? My favorite. Okay, metaphysics is this. It is the limits and boundaries of existence. Okay? What I mean by that is this, is what is and what is not. What can be in existence and what cannot be in existence. What are those limits and boundaries of what is? 2 examples we could use. Here's a metaphysical idea. God is the end-all be-all. He's created everything and there's nothing outside of God. That's a metaphysical understanding. God is the limit and boundary of existence. Okay? We talked about in our last lecture about that kind of scientific philosophical position where what is physical and what is not physical is nothing. So only things that can be observed is, and what cannot be observed is not. That would be a metaphysical understanding as well, because the limits and boundaries of existence are physical reality. Okay? Another major one is epistemology. Okay? Epistemology comes from the Greek word epistem, which means knowledge, the study of knowledge. Okay? Study of knowledge. All right, as strange as this sounds, what we do in epistemology is, what do we know? Our ask this question, what do we know, and how do we know that we know it? Okay, it sounds very weird. And just to be short, to give some examples, we'll talk about things like, how do I know my hand's in front of my face? That sounds strange, but the question will be, well, because I can see it, or I can observe it. But the next thing you'll see epistemologists do is begin questioning our observations. Have we ever observed certain things we thought were one way and actually the other? Have we ever been in a dream and believed that something was in front of us when it wasn't? And if we are in a dream or in some world of appearance, how would we know that we're in that world? And how could we tell the difference between what is and what isn't? How could we know it? Okay? That is epistemology. If you're into philosophers like Descartes, Locke, Berkeley, Hume, Kant, okay, even Hegel, this is the section you would probably like the most. All right? Then there's ethics. Okay? Some of you may be here because you're in my ethics class currently. Okay? What are ethics? Ethics are basically the standards of right and wrong, good and evil. Standards of right, wrong, good, evil. Also, we could put it this way: what is valuable? How do we value things? Okay? In one sense, we could say this action is right or this is wrong. That's what we do in ethics, argue about that. Or we could say what is valuable? What is something worth it and what isn't worth it? All right? Out of all the 5 different branches, ethics is the one I think that most people, or almost everybody at least, has an opinion on. You might not have an opinion on metaphysics or epistemology, or as we'll see, aesthetics and logic, but everyone has an opinion on ethics. Everyone at least has some idea of what they think is good and what they think is wrong or are evil. Okay? Everyone has some idea of what is valuable and not. And this is why this tends to be the most popular philosophical class or philosophy class, as well as the one most people are most interested in. Okay? Is ethics. The fourth one is aesthetics. And this is actually one of my favorites as well, though it's out of all of them, it's probably the least talked about in an intro class. And what aesthetics are is basically this: the standards of beauty. Okay? Of beauty, or I can also say of ugly as well. What makes something beautiful? What makes something ugly? What makes something wonderful? What makes something disgusting? Okay? That's what aesthetics looks at. I think one of the basic questions in aesthetics we'd also ask is something like, what is art? One of my favorite questions, okay? And just to give a little example, here you go. What makes something like, in a museum, let's say in a museum there's a painting of, Jesus being crucified, yet someone's peeing on him or something, and that's what the painting is. Obviously, someone's going to say that's obscene. That's not art. It's disgusting. It's derogatory. It's, it's taking dignity away from a religion. It's not art. But someone else may hang it up and say it is art. What is that line that makes it art or not art? A personal example, when I was living in Spain, I was in Madrid at an art museum with one of my friends, and we're looking at all these great, amazing paintings, some by Picasso and Dali. We're really into it, and we're saying, this is art. Then we walk into a room, and we're standing there, and in this room there is one huge painting. It's a white canvas with a red line going down through the middle of it, and that's it. My friend goes, see, that's not art because I can do it. I go, well, and I start arguing with him. But that is what aesthetics would do, is what is art and what isn't. What makes a canvas that anyone could do, but just a red line going through, what makes that art, and what makes if I did it maybe not art, or maybe it is art, okay? That's what aesthetics are about. And finally, there's logic. And many say that logic is the most important of all these. And we're going to talk about that right at the end. We'll see, okay? What is logic? It's the standards of good argumentation, okay? Or the standards of good argument, okay? So when you have two people debating, giving arguments, what logic tells us is who is giving the better argument? What are the rules for what makes something a good argument and what makes something a bad argument? And the reason this is so important is because that's what philosophy does. To use reason, we're going to give arguments, okay? And if we don't know what the good arguments are from the bad ones, then how are we going to know who is right? So having a logic is one of the most important things we can have in philosophy. Many, and just to end on this, many philosophers believe that logic is the most important of all of them. And think about it, okay? If you don't have standards of good argument, then how in the world are we supposed to talk about what is metaphysical and what is epistemological, what's ethics, what's aesthetics? How are we supposed to talk about it if we don't know how to argue with it? If we don't know what our standards are for who wins the argument and who doesn't, who is more right and not, okay? I agree. But on the other side, I want to mention this. This is kind of my opinion, all right? I believe metaphysics is the most important. Because think about it. You're right. We do need standards for good argument, okay? That's a must. But how do we know what those standards are if we don't know what the limits and boundaries of existence are? If we don't know, can contradictions be true? Can things come in and out of existence? What can be and what can't be? If we haven't decided that, how do we know what the standards are going to be? Okay? It seems metaphysics needs to come before logic. But then the paradox continues. But in order to know what metaphysically is there, don't we need a logic to know that? But in order to know this logic, don't we need a metaphysical standing as well? And that raises the question, is there something maybe even more primordial than metaphysics and logic altogether? That's a deeply philosophical question, okay? And some may agree and may not agree with me. But if you remember from that very first video on philosophy, philosophers tend to agree with each other, okay? Tend to disagree with each other, all right? But that is it for this lecture. This ends the lecture series of what is philosophy, okay, the introduction to philosophy. And I hope to see you next time. I'm Castleberry again, and this has been my philosophical lecture shorts. Thank you very much.